Hello everyone, I'm just doing this quick video so that you have some of the end of the Mexican Revolution. In class, we had addressed some of the civil war between the constitutionalists and the conventionists and the ways in which we see kind of this rise of Carranza. And in that, we also see a kind of a pushback of Pancho Villa. Certainly, this is happening with the Americans, where the Americans are, Pancho Villa is trying to push to get American intervention. He will launch a raid in Columbus, New Mexico, and Wilson will respond to that. So we get a expedition of General Pershing, who's really on the hunt for Pancho Villa. He really is unable to find Pancho Villa. And so eventually, the president of the United States is going to realize that this is going to either lead to war or the United States has to withdraw. And this is happening in January of 1917. The U.S. will enter into World War I in April of 1917. So Wilson clearly also becomes really distracted by some of the things happening in World War One. But this pursuit of Pancho Villa also causes Pancho Villa to kind of become very, very, much on the run and hidden and become a figure that even within Mexico, there's questions about his particular role. At the same time, Pancho Villa is going to remain with a lot of supporters, and he and Carranza, do not get along. Okay, so that becomes important. The Zapatistas in Morelos will send an open letter to Carranza to try to receive national attention. So there's a lot of discontent amongst the Zapatistas who really, they were hoping that Carranza might have gone in certain directions, and of course he does not. And so there's a lot of discontent, nothing close to the plan of Ayala. And Carranza will ultimately send one of his generals who will launch a really, really horrific attempt to try to convince Zapata that somebody is going to be coming over to his side. And there is this like kind of whole rigging to lure Zapata into a space where he becomes assassinated. And that is really, horrific because it does have a huge impact on the Zapatistas who continue to fight. But we do get a great deal of change in the scale of some of that fight from Morelos. Okay, so, just kind of keep in mind that. And Pancho Villa will ultimately also be assassinated several years later. For the end of Carranza, a couple of things. Obregon is going to turn on Carranza, and that becomes really significant. And some historians will argue that pretty early on, even around the time that all of these groups are meeting up at Aguas Calientes, it seems that Obregon has like kind of a little bit of a plan to become president. He is somebody who doesn't come from money, so where Carranza is very much kind of an elite and somebody who is maybe catering to that more aristocratic class, Obregon is somebody who doesn't necessarily have that same vibe, although he was always considered a moderate. He is not a radical revolutionary like the Zapatistas. And there is, by 1920, Carranza, who's not supposed to be, reelected again, nominates somebody essentially as a puppet for himself. But there's always going to be this opposition, and there are massive opposition from Carranza and from Obregon. I'm sorry, from Villa and Obregon. And Carranza ultimately is going to be assassinated while he is on the road to exile. Okay, so he is somebody who he's on a train and ultimately taking like everything with him. He recognizes that his time is up, but he is assassinated on the way. Obregon is elected to a four-year term, and he's elected by like a pretty wide margin. A lot of historians would say this is where the military phase of the revolution ends, in terms of this, revolutionary focus on trying to bring down every next successive ruler. And you can really put Obregon to some degree with the leader that follows, Calle. They have some similarities. Obregon is sometimes going to be looked at, as somebody who attempts some degree of populism. He uses a lot of rhetoric to speak the language of the people, and he is different than Carranza, perhaps because he recognizes that there is a revolutionary spirit that kind of needs to be quieted. The discontent is so significant. Obregon knows that he can't ignore it. So he does try to achieve, basic land reforms. He does try to enable, greater rights for indigenous people. There becomes kind of a attempt to kind of vocalize some of the discontent of the revolution, and some of this is going to come out in his policies, but he's often going to hold back. This is not the plan of Ayala. This is not what people were really asking for. He's going to do just enough to try to squelch some of the discontent so it doesn't overflow. And it's a strategy, so it's kind of a strategic thing, okay? He's a mechanic. He's from the north. He does kind of build what some historians would say is Mexican national capitalism. So really focusing on this domestic economy and trying to protect the domestic economy. So he's not somebody who's anti-capitalism. He's not somebody who's a socialist, anything like that. But he is going to try to use some revolutionary rhetoric. And, this comes up in the film, The Storm That Swept Mexico. If you go back and you watch some of that, this is what the tiger is. The tiger, taming the tiger, leaders who can tame the tiger. It's really all about trying to suppress some of that revolutionary discontent, and he becomes a master at that. There is some distribution of land to indigenous people, significant amount of this, but opposition is also going to slow the process, and Obregon is also going to be open to the opposition. The government also doesn't enable any support, so if land is transferred, people are still without, mechanization and seeds, and debt level is high, and there isn't like any government program for indigenous people and agriculture in a real monetary sense. So a lot of the land programs don't really become successful, okay? But you can look at Obregon as somebody who is really very much a centralist. Maybe Pancho Villa, is somebody who's like going to be, less so at the end of the day. He is kind of in his like northern enclave, and that's kind of where his power focuses. One thing that Obregon does, and some of this is connected to his education secretary. I think historians would argue that one of the significant things that Obregon does is really enable advocacy, and in some cases a huge budget for education. And this is kind of a focus on schools, and ensuring that schools not offered by the church, but schools offered by the public state are going to be available and funded even to the most vulnerable members of society. And we have large numbers of people who are still lacking literacy. Some of this education campaign, which is under Jose Vasconcelos, he becomes somebody who is going to attach himself to this notion of Mexicans as having a mixed identity, which is very inclusive of indigenous heritage. And so there becomes this kind of awakening of a national consciousness. We're also going to see this in some of the interest in mural painting and public painting in a way that's like part of the education program, because there is a kind of very public reception to seeing vulnerable populations in murals that are celebrated, indigenous culture and traditions and music and whatnot that are celebrated. So indigenismo, okay, I said that terribly. blah, 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 indigenismo. So you're getting a cultural kind of connection of the indigenous Mexicans, and that's becoming much more celebrated. And it's really connected to the, central government plan. This notion of what it means to be Mexican is attached to, highlighting the Mexican economy and so on. And much of these rural programs are really designed to affect your rural populations. Okay, and so we see specific people rise up, in particular feminists. Some feminists who become Elena Torres, for example, becomes like maybe significant because there is a huge teaching and teacher training program that's all about working with rural women. And some of the teacher training is designed for the women themselves. So, rural women teaching, learning how to read, and then teaching other rural women how to read, and that becomes really significant. Sometimes these rural women are referred to as campanisas, so you kind of get this empowerment going on. And some of the significance of what's happening in the Mexican Revolution is a great degree of this like buildup of Mexican feminism and this kind of opportunity that women have to be really significant in the political state. We see it earlier in the revolution with women who are fighting in the revolution or accompanying their husbands to war. That is a really significant aspect to the earlier parts of the Mexican Revolution, like in Pancho Villa's army, for example. There's all of these women that are supporting the men who are fighting, but we also see it with intellectual women, some of whom are socialists, who are going to be increasing kind of this voice of feminism. And a lot of it is going to go toward the notion of the vote, which doesn't necessarily become successful, but these like empowerment efforts arguably do play a strong role in like kind of gender identity in the time period. So we get the focus of education, is really getting greater degree of indigenous buy-in, but we kind of do see a little bit of an attack on this. There are attacks on state teachers. So some of this is coming from religious sectors of society. So that very Roman Catholic conservative group. There's no banning at this time of religious education, although that was one of the components of the 1917 Constitution, was really to replace religious education that was derived from the church to something that is coming from, the central government. We see Calles follow Obregon, and in some ways he is very similar. He's handpicked by Obregon. He's going to dominate for like a decade, and he's going to be kind of like in and out. Sometimes he's putting a puppet government in place, and sometimes it's him. We do get some more land reform, but very similarly to Obregon, this is basically a safety valve, just enough, so peasants don't rise up. He will continue to build Mexican capitalism. Protective tariffs are a part of this, subsidies for particular industries. He does continue to cater to foreign dollars, but this is alongside efforts to boost the domestic economy. He creates, for example, a Bank of Mexico that is going to be significant in, currency stability, and so that becomes a significant piece. He does announce support for women's rights. In reality, Calles is not going to gain a lot of traction in this, and we definitely see in this a very significant rising up of conservatives under the Catholic Church. Calles, in response, will close religious schools, and the church will actually, for a time, suspend church services, which is very significant. And militant Catholics will actually take up arms against this like notion of the Constitution of 1917 and some of these plans to have, the state do all of the education. This is known as the Cristeros Rebellion, and it's actually suppressed by Dwight Morrow. If you ever in the Englewood area, right, he is somebody whose name is on the high school, but he becomes significant, in kind of dealing with from the American kind of diplomacy, somebody who's dealing with the Cristeros rebellion. Obregon is assassinated, and he's assassinated by a radical Catholic. Maximoto really refers to the style of government that Caius had. This is very, very much a plan where he is the Jefe Maximo, right? He is like the big guy, and the people he puts in place are like loyal to him. So he doesn't become reelected, but he puts in place puppets, okay?